To be here today. What I want to do is sort of provide a little bit of backdrop to the studies that I'll describe here today. Several years ago, our research group was conducting a positron emission tomography study, a PET study. We were interested in the functional neuroanatomy of traumatic recollection. We put ads in the Boston Globe seeking adult survivors of childhood sexual abuse. We would then bring these folks in and conduct psychiatric diagnostic interviews. I was one of the clinicians doing these psych assessments. And the purpose of these assessments was to identify those individuals who had post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, as a result of this childhood sexual abuse, CSA experiences, and those who did not. But anyway, in the course of conducting these psychiatric interviews, I had 3 strange experiences, and they're all alike, all in the span of about a week, 10 days, thereabouts. In each case, when I asked the subject what had happened, when did it occur, who the perpetrator was, and so forth, in each case, the subject who had responded to these ads seeking survivors of adults or of childhood sexual abuse said to me, "I don't know." My first thought was perhaps they misread the ad, but that turned out not to be the case. So I asked as politely as I could, "How is it that you responded to an ad seeking survivors of childhood sexual abuse and you have no memories of having been abused?" And so, well, that's easy. I eat too much and make myself throw up. I have nightmares that I cannot explain. I feel tense around my stepfather and I don't know why. My moods fluctuate with no apparent cause. I must have been sexually abused and I can't remember the memories. So these sort of symptoms were deemed as indicators of repressed memories, memories that they couldn't get at. Turns out we could not use these individuals in the PET study. The PET study requires, well, memories, all right? And so after I was sitting down talking to one of my colleagues, a cognitive psychologist, Dan Schachter, I said, "Geez, Dan, here we have some folks that are reporting these repressed memories of childhood sexual abuse. There's tremendous fury going on, especially, I might add, in Boston. And nobody's studied them. Nobody's brought them into the laboratory to study cognitive function, memory functioning in these individuals." I said, let's see if we can find them. Dan's first reaction was, "You know, Rich, that might have been a fluke." I said, "Well, how do you know?" "Let's put an ad in the newspaper seeking individuals who believe they harbor repressed memories of sexual abuse." Turns out we had no difficulty finding them. We eventually recruited 4 groups of subjects. Those who believe they harbor these repressed memories. These are the ones that couldn't participate in the PET study. And also people who reported recovered memories of childhood sexual abuse. That is to say, they reported having been sexually abused as a kid, not having thought about it for many years, and now reminded of it once again. A 3rd group were those who we called who had continuous memories of abuse, said they'd never forgotten such things. And finally, a control group. In any event, we embarked upon a series of experimental studies. And the studies that we did were derived from 2 competing perspectives. On the one hand, we tested hypotheses about mechanisms that ought to mediate the development of false memories, if in fact that's the case. We tested these sorts of mechanisms in the laboratory. The idea here being is that we might be able to capture these processes in a controlled experimental context, ones that might speak to the possibility of false memory formation. We also did studies coming from the entirely different perspective. What are the mechanisms that ought to be operative if people can block out, inhibit, suppress, and then later recall memories of childhood sexual abuse? So we did 2 sets of studies. Now, one of the experiments that we did showed that women who had recovered memories of childhood sexual abuse were more prone to develop false memories for words having nothing to do with trauma in the laboratory. Sort of a false memory propensity characterized that group, as opposed to those who'd always remembered their abuse. We were unable, however, to tell which of these subjects had true memories of abuse and those who may have had false memories of abuse. It was a dilemma we had. It's tough getting corroboration for these memories, and even when you don't get corroboration, it does not mean the memory is a false memory either. It's a mistaken inference occasionally people make. So we were confronted with this problem. If we wanted to study this false memory propensity, how could we get at this from a different angle? So we figured we ought to find some folks who have recovered memories of trauma that we're pretty darn sure, in fact, do not have actual memories of trauma. Now, I'm going to describe the 2 experiments that we did on this topic, and I'm talking about the we here. My collaborators on these studies, Susan Clancy, a recent PhD student of mine, Natasha Lasko, Mark Lenzenweger, Mike Macklin, Scott Orr, Roger Pittman, and Dan Schachter. These are the, we do a lot of collaborative work, and there's various combinations of collaborators, students, and colleagues on these studies, but those are the folks that work with me on these projects. So we put an ad in the newspaper. Have you been abducted by aliens? Researchers at Harvard are seeking adults to participate in a memory study who believe they've been abducted by aliens. For further information, call Susan at 617-495-3746. That's Susan Clancy, my graduate student. So we figured, well, we'll recruit them. Now, at the time, John Mack, professor of psychiatry at Harvard Medical School, based at Cambridge Hospital, it's a few blocks away from my office, which is the Department of Psychology at Harvard. And I told John, I said, yeah, I'm gonna move into the space alien abduction business. And he knew I'd worked in trauma before and recovered memories of sexual abuse. And he says to me, how are you gonna get your subjects? I said, I'll put an ad in the newspaper, like I always do. He goes, Rich, you put an ad in the newspaper like this, and you're not gonna get real abductees. I said, what do you mean, not real ones? And he goes, well, you're going to have folks calling up your lab, you know, and they are going to be, playing jokes on you and clowning around and doing things of this sort. And you won't get the real experiencers. Turns out he was right. We did have some problems. But this, by the way, for those of you who don't know, is Mack's book. Mack had won the Pulitzer Prize in 1977 for his book on T.E. Lawrence of Arabia, and then he wrote this book called Abduction, Human Encounters with Aliens. New York Times bestseller. At any event, Mack was right. We did have some problems getting the real abductees. It's very, I worked in panic disorder and OCD and all these other areas. Let me tell you, this is different. And so, for example, we did have people playing jokes on us. For example, there was this one guy, he would leave a message on our answering machine in our laboratory every night. This went on for 2 weeks. You come in the morning, the lights flash, hey, we got some subjects, right? Play the message back, and it goes something like this. Talking like he's R2-D2, making like he's some kind of space alien himself. But we also had people who were a little more sophisticated in their joke playing. So Mack was onto something. This one guy, for example, play the message and goes something like this. Hello, this is Bob Wilson from Boston Chevrolet. I read your ad in the newspaper about your memory study. I've been abducted by aliens. I'd like to hear a little bit more about your research, so please call me at Boston Chevrolet, 555-1212. Thank you very much. So Clancy and I think we got ourselves a live one. So she calls him up, Susan calls him up. So, hi, this is Susan Clancy in the Department of Psychology at Harvard University. May I speak to Bob Wilson? He goes, yeah, this is Bob Wilson. You're in the market for a car today. That's how they talk in Boston. And she goes, no, I'm not in the market for a car today, but I'm responding to the message you left on our answering machine in the lab about the memory study. He goes, memory study? And she goes, yes, you had mentioned that you've been abducted by aliens and be interested in participating in our memory study. He goes, aliens, abduction, what are you talking about? And suddenly you hear all the other salesmen at Boston Chevrolet laughing like crazy in the background as the real Bob Wilson slams down the phone. So he's different. It's different doing work in this area, believe me. But we did actually 2 experiments. And the first one here was designed to answer the question that I mentioned a moment ago. Are people who report abduction by space aliens prone to develop false memories in the laboratory? Now, here are the folks that we eventually recruited. Recovered memory group. These folks here have had episodes of sleep paralysis followed by recovery of abduction memories. Now, Eddie mentioned what sleep paralysis is, and I'll describe briefly what interviews with these folks are like. We asked them, how did it all begin? They said, well, I was lying in bed one night on my back, hours before dawn. I woke up, I could see my bedroom in the semi-darkness, and I wanted to roll over in bed, and I couldn't move. I was absolutely paralyzed and terrified. And then suddenly, I sensed a presence in the bedroom. I began to hear buzzing sounds, zzz, zzz, lights flashing, tingling sensations coursing through my body as my body began to levitate off of the bed. And then suddenly, there was these beings started approaching the bed, coming closer and closer to me. I blacked out, and then later I woke up, the sun was up. I wondered, my God, what had happened? Now, it turns out this sounds an awful lot like an episode of isolated sleep paralysis. What happens in these episodes, no more pathological in the case of the hiccups, is that what happens is that during rapid eye movement sleep, REM sleep, the stage of sleep when we do most of our dreaming, we're entirely paralyzed. But we don't know that because we're asleep. But that's a good thing too, because otherwise we would act out our dreams. But in one of these episodes, what happens is that the mental, perceptual aspects of REM become temporarily desynchronized with the physical aspects, the motor paralysis. So you get a person who's waking up, they're fully conscious, and they're aware of being totally paralyzed. About 30% of the population in some studies has had that experience, quite common. It usually passes in a few seconds, a minute or most. And about 5% of the population will have the intrusion of REM mentation into emerging wakefulness. That is, they are dreaming with their eyes open. And that's the basis of the hypnopompic, or upon awakening, hallucinations of tingling, sight, sounds, and what have you. Now, as Eddie alluded to, it can be a very frightening experience. Most people, when they have one of these, don't say, "Oh, how interesting, a temporary desynchrony in the architecture of REM." Most of them say, "My God, I got a neurological disease." So it can be a very upsetting, frightening experience. Now, what happens is that then these folks, as the previous speaker pointed out, they'll often then go to various mental health professionals whose names will go unmentioned in Cambridge, who will then help them after giving them proper reading materials, remember the missing memories. The assumption being is that after those beings came into your bedroom, it was so terrifying you repressed the memories, and only if relaxed by hypnosis will you be able to recover what happened next. At that point, you get your alien narratives. Now, it turns out is that the phenomenon of sleep paralysis accompanied by hypnopompic hallucinations is in fact a very common phenomenon. Do we have a pointer around here? The laser pointer? Oh, boy, okay. Laser pointer walked off. Oh, well. Oh, that is another microphone. Okay, well, I just got to the point. This painting here is from the late 18th century by the Swiss-born British painter, early exponent of Romanticism, Henry Fuseli. It's entitled The Nightmare. There's the mayor right on the top there, peeking his head. Now, most sleep researchers say this is not a nightmare. This is sleep paralysis with the hypnopompic hallucinations. Thank you very much. Yes, right. Okay, I won't abduct it. Oh, here we go. Okay, there's the mayor. Okay, so you got this woman, she's lying back on her back, usually on your back when this happens. Now, this fat little guy with the pointed ears, that's an incubus. Now, folks who had these episodes often feel something pressing on them. And some of our subjects see something pressing on them, some alien looking at them. Now, it turns out that depending on what culture and period of time you're talking about, here we're talking about 18th century Europe, it's the agent of the devil, the incubi, the succubi. Down south it's being called ridden by the witch, up in Newfoundland being visited by the old hag. In Cambridge, Massachusetts, it's called being visited by a space alien. Okay, now we also recruited a second group of subjects, a group that we didn't even know existed initially. We call them the repressed memory group, for lack of a better word. These are folks who responded to our ad who said, yes, they've been abducted by aliens, but they didn't have any memories. They're a little bit like the group that couldn't participate in the PET study. So now you're probably thinking right now, why is it that someone thinks they've been abducted by a space alien and they don't remember having been abducted by a space alien? The obvious question to ask, right? So we asked it. Would they tell us? They say things like, see those marks? The result of a probe, I suspect, by aliens. I see pictures of E.T. I get panic attacks. Why would I panic if something hadn't happened that I cannot remember? I wake up in the morning, twisted up like a pretzel. Surely I could have never got into that position in my bed by myself. They took me and brought me back, twisted me up when I woke up like that. These are true stories. This is not an Irish fact. This is a true story. And this is what they tell us. They're making this inferences about what had happened. And my personal favorite was, I have a passion for reading science fiction. Explain that. Well, I think we got some other explanations, but be that as it may. So Susan said, should we test it? Sure, what the heck, why not? Let's see. Okay. So we also have a control group. Well, these are people who deny having been abducted by aliens. Okay. You can still find them in Cambridge. Now, the procedure that we used here is called a Diess-Roddinger-McDermott paradigm, a DRM paradigm, one that was developed in the 1959, revived in 1995, when people began to study false memory propensity. It's a very simple sort of paradigm, and it's one similar to the one that we had used in the previous study on the CSA cases. Basically what happens here, I'll just go through it. The details are not so important as long as you get the main point. Subjects, here, 24 study lists. These are just lists of words, have nothing to do with abduction or trauma, just lists of words. Now, that vary in the number of semantic associates. That is, say, you get a list of words, and these words can all be related to a common theme or not. You know, they vary to how many words converge on this. Now, after each encoding of one of these lists, the subjects do some math problems. We want to clear the register, you know, and so forth. Then you get another one, and so forth. Now, subjects are given a final recognition test, and then they're also given recall tests. Now, the main thing here is that there is a word, a single word, that captures the essence of the list, its gist, its essence, that is not, in fact, presented. So the question here in these tests of false memory propensity is that if you give people a lot of words that are kind of related to a theme, will the persons be sucked in by that gist and affirm, having seen, recalled, recognized material that was never presented? Will they have, if you have a false memory of a lousy word that is related to this list? Now, so for example, here is the kinds of lists that have been used. Bed, rest, awake, tired, dream, wake, night, blanket, doze, slumber, snore, pillow, peace, yawn, and drowsy. And as Sherlock Holmes might have said, the dog that didn't bark in the night. The word that captures the essence of the list that you would have expected to have occurred that is not there is, in fact, sleep. I heard some people saying sleep. You're the false memory folks. Well, people in general will tend to fall prey to this sort of a test, but it turns out that that some people are more prone than others. So our question is, will our people with repressed memories of alien abduction or who have recovered memories of alien abduction, will they show this false propensity to form this false memories, even of these lousy words? Turns out yes. What we find here, this is the false recall averaging across the list. The lists vary in the number of semantic associates. The more associates you get, like the one I showed you, the more likely people are going to fall prey to this. Here's the, this is the percent of people endorsing having recalled, or endorsing recalling the word that was not presented. So basically what you get here, the story is quite systematic. The repressed and recovered memory groups of alien abduction, twice the rate of that of the controls. And once you go to the once you go to the lists that have all share a common theme, everybody tends to go up, but the rate of false memory occurrence is, again, twice as high in a repressed and recovered memory group. Now you get the same thing with recognition. You always get more of a false memory effect with recognition, as it turns out. Here's the average across lists, and then finally for the 15 associates list. So, conclusion from study 1, adults reporting either repressed or recovered memories of space alien abduction exhibit heightened propensity for false memories in the laboratory. So we now had two groups who had recovered memories, had this sort of recovery memory experience, who show false memory propensity. I want to emphasize, however, that these does not mean that the sexual abuse survivors are somehow equivalent to the space alien abduction subjects. When one of our studies got reported, some of our local adversaries were screaming in the New York Times that we have a hidden political agenda to silence the voices of survivors by equating them with alien abductees. This is some sort of nonsense, typical of Boston. But anyway, this is a similarity, this false memory propensity, but there's huge differences as well between the sexual abuse groups and the alien abductees, as you'll see in a minute. So we did another study. This is the second one we did, and what was designed to answer the question, do alien abductees exhibit the psychophysiologic signature of PTSD while listening to trauma scripts of their abduction experiences? Now, what motivated this question was we wanted to know whether recollecting an apparently false memory of trauma would drive a physiology hitherto attributable only to real conditioning experiences. That is, will false memories produce the psychophysiologic reactivity that memories of, say, combat in Vietnam produce in the laboratory? Or do you really have to be conditioned? Or do you really have to happen? We really didn't know. So we figured, well, let's do an experiment on this. Now, we used a paradigm called the script-driven imagery paradigm, devised by Peter Lang, actually, in the 1970s, to study imagery in phobics. My two colleagues, Scott Orr and Roger Pittman, modified it to accommodate post-traumatic stress disorder. Basically, this is what you do. You get the subject down, and you have the subject write out this narrative of, for example, Vietnam combat trauma. Okay? You write this out, and then another stressful event that has nothing to do with the PTSD diagnosis, And then a positive event, maybe the birth of one's first child. A neutral event, like doing the dishes last night, something that's not especially exciting. And then what we do is we take these narratives and we convert them into a 30-second audio-taped script. And then we play this audio tape back to the subjects in the laboratory as we measure physiological reactions of emotion. So for example, we'll measure heart rate, how fast their heart is beating. Skin conductance responding, sweating on the palm of the hand. Electromyographic activity on the face, grimacing as the person's remembering this. So they hear the audio tape and they're asked to remember it. So it's the physiology that accompanies the psychological state, psychophysiologic reactivity. Now, why we're interested in this is folks who study post-traumatic stress disorder report that if you've got PTSD and you hear your memory, if you will, of the traumatic event, you'll show this reactivity. But if you do not have PTSD, you may report distress without the physiology. Now, here's an example of a previous study. And this example and the one I'll show you later are disguised. You can't identify the person, obviously. But here's an example from one of the earlier studies we did. Okay, it's May 1968. You're on an ambush just north of blank when your unit encounters a divisional-sized force. As the area becomes illuminated, the enemy attack with hand grenades. Your eyes open wide as hand-to-hand combat breaks out. You feel so frightened that your teeth cannot stop chattering. A grenade hits you in the head and your heart begins to pound. You pick it up and throw it. The grenade explodes you, wounding you. Your whole body shakes. Now, of course, obviously I'm reading this a bit faster here, but this is the sort of thing that in the Vietnam combat vets with PTSD will provoke the physiologic reaction. Okay, now, space alien abductees. Okay, we got 6 women, 4 men, all have had sleep paralysis, plus hypnopompic upon awakening hallucinations. 8 out of these folks had been in various recovered memory sessions to help them remember what happened next, presumably block memories. Now, these memories are really exotic. That's when they get whisked out of the windows up into the spaceships and probed and things like this. This is when they learn they've had hybrid children. Some of our subjects have, 70% of them mentioned having, sex with aliens, meeting their hybrid kids. One guy pointed out, meeting his little hybrid boy who would communicate with him telepathically, saying, "Daddy, Daddy." Very vivid memory of this. So this comes up under the hypnotic regression sessions. So it's after the sleep paralysis, this is what you get. Now, we also found out that these folks are into a lot of interesting stuff. Very open to experience with a lot of things they're really into, they find very cool, like tarot cards for telling the future, astrology, bioenergetic healing therapies, alternative remedies, the belief in ghosts, and a key point, 90% of them characterize themselves as spiritual people. Really, they're a bunch of lapsed Catholics, lapsed Protestants, but they see themselves as very spiritual. Important point, makes them different from some other groups we've studied. We did psychiatric diagnostic assessments with him. John Mack has always said, these people are not crazy. These people are not mentally ill, and he's absolutely correct. They do not qualify for psychotic illnesses. In fact, actually, the rates of disorder is not especially high. We had one person with current subclinical PTSD. None of our folks ever met full criteria, but some had subclinical symptoms after they recovered memories of having been molested by the aliens in the spaceships and probed and what have you. We had a smattering of other disorders, panic disorder, specific phobia of insects, bipolar disorder, not otherwise specified, et cetera, et cetera. Past diagnoses, again, major depression, more subclinical PTSD and the like. So by and large, they're pretty much healthy as everybody else. Okay, good, 5 minutes, okay. The control group, people who deny ever being abducted by aliens. One person had sleep paralysis, no hypnopompic hallucination. She thought it was a neurological disease until it didn't happen. She forgot about it. Okay, they're not so much into these beliefs. Okay, now, I got to move fast, folks. I'm sorry. I'm trying to stay on track here. By and large, these people, the psychometric stuff makes them, as you see here, they are not the stress group. You can take a look at their depression scores. If you look at their BDIs, they're not depressed. That's, by the way, BDI, not BDIs. Look at their eyeballs. Yeah, it's Beck Depression Inventory Score. That's BDI, not little squinty eyes. Very, very low. We should all have BDIs at low. Very low trait anxiety. Now, where they do differ, however, is that they show elevated scores in dissociation. Beth Loftus alluded to the DES, Dissociative Experiences Score, earlier. Measure of these alterations in consciousness. Magical ideation. This is belief in unconventional modes of causation, such as Astral projection, telekinesis, oh yeah, sure, I'm in and all that stuff. You know, these guys score high on that, no surprise. And absorption. This is a measure of fantasy proneness. People who score high on absorption become entranced by a sunset. They have vivid imaginations. When they read a novel, it comes alive before their eyes. And they're also more prone to memory distortion. Okay, here is a recovered memory of an alien abduction thing to give you an idea of what our subjects tell us. Is, you're on the ship, walking down a corridor with an alien. You enter a room and see a group of hybrid children playing, half alien, half human. Walking into another room, you see a group of aliens and humans standing in a circle around a table. Suddenly, you realize that you must make love to this alien woman right there in front of everyone. Your heart begins to beat faster and your hands become clammy and sweaty. Your face is flushed and you feel warm. You hate this. You detest having sex with this slimy, non-human alien, but you have no choice. You are lying naked on the table and she mounts you. You feel sick to your stomach. You know, so it's the same sort of thing with the descriptions of the physical reactions and as Peter Lang would say, the stimulus propositions, the prompting context. If anybody says hypnosis can't help you recover exotic memories, think of this one. Okay, so do abductees exhibit greater reactivity to abduction and stressful scripts? And the stressful scripts here were these were traumatic scripts. They didn't have PTSD. These were not trivial. So then to positive and neutral scripts relative to control subjects. So the question here is, are memories of abduction the functional equivalent of genuine stressful memories? And the answer to that is yes. Here are the results here. This is the statistics. We're kind of in a hurry. I'll show you the graphs. There's the p-values and effect sizes. They're all quite large. But here's the psychophys here. This is heart rate. Now, if you take a look at the hatch bars, that's reactivity of the space alien abductees. The white bars are the control subject. Incidentally, control subjects came into the lab, and they were hearing the scripts of the abductee. So they were yoked, if you will. They were matched for the abductee. And the stranger, so they're hearing somebody's birth of their first child and maybe the murder of a friend, these terrible stressful scripts, and then being in a spaceship. As you can see here, the control subjects don't respond very much here at all. They come out of the lab and they go, that was weird. But they don't react physiologically. But as you see, the abductees do, in fact, react physiologically. They also do for skin conductance responding. There's a little bit of an uptick even for positive here. Electromyographic activity is somewhat less pronounced, but still statistically significant. Now, I know we're running quick on the time. I got to move quickly here. Well, what we wanted to do is say, well, how do our space alien abductees compare to real PTSD patients? So what we did is we replotted our data and compared it to that of Terry Keene, PTSD researcher in Boston. Basically what Terry did in his study, he took the reactivity to a neutral script and subtracted from a combat script into PTSD patients, okay? And that's what you see here on the left. So you get the heart rate with the change score, it's about 3 beats per minute. And we did the same thing with our space alien abductees. And as you can see, their abductees are even more reactive to the real trauma patient. So what it seems to suggest here is that quote-unquote false memories of trauma can provoke a reaction in certain subjects that are at least as great, in this case greater, than real PTSD patients. Same with skin conductance, same pretty much with EMG. Now I'm going to close up here with a few final comments. Psychophysiologic reactivity to trauma scripts, memories of trauma that the subject here in the lab, prompted by these scripts, is driven by emotional belief, whether accurate or not. It's an important point. Intense emotion during memory recovery does not confirm the veracity of the memory. We've heard this in my neighborhood recently in some famous criminal trials, that when people, if they're remembering a particular traumatic event and they show intense affect during it, it must have happened. No, that's not it. They must have believed it happened. They must be sincerely believing that they actually experienced it. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. This is not about lying. This is about actually believing something happened, whether it did or not. Now, so what have we learned here in conclusion? I think there are a number, Eddie mentioned a couple different hypotheses that might account for the alien abduction phenomenon, but I think here we really need a number of ingredients for a space alien abductee, for a recipe for an abductee. A number of things are needed, I suspect. One, New Age beliefs. These folks endorse all kinds of things, including alien visitation. And this, I think, sets people up to favor this sort of an account. Second, familiarity with the cultural narrative of alien abduction. As it was pointed out, it is everywhere. So, for example, here is the Weekly World News. Appearances notwithstanding, this is not a journal of the American Psychological Association. This is here, space alien backs Bush for president. The fickle alien supported Democrat Bill Clinton. We heard that a moment ago. Of course, here we got something more recent. This is from last summer, Boston Democratic National Convention. Space alien spotted hugging Kerry. Does this make John a shoo-in? Apparently not. But anyway, so the narratives are everywhere. John Mack would tell me, he says, I hear people in California and New England, they all say the same narrative to me, but they've never met. I said, yes, but listen, ask any child in America what happens on December 24th, and you're going to get a narrative. But this big, heavy guy with a red suit, white beard, coming down the chimney, giving you presents, and these kids haven't met either. The Santa Claus narrative, the abduction narrative is all part of our culture today. It's available for interpreting these experiences. Elevated fantasy proneness, absorption, is, I think, a key point here. I suspect this is especially integral to psychophysiological activity. Sleep paralysis and hypnopompic hallucinations, we've been impressed by how common this, in fact, is in our subjects. And finally, these quasi-hypnotic memory recovery sessions. Now, when I ask subjects, if you could do it all over again, would you rather not have been abducted? And they tell me, when this first started happening, it was terrifying, absolutely traumatizing. When they first started taking me and doing these things to me, as evinced by the psychophysiology when they recall these early memories. But upon reflection, I realize that there are beings out there who care for us, for the fate of the earth. I've been involved in the hybrid breeding program. I'm special. It has deepened my spiritual appreciation of the universe. So on balance, I'm glad it's happened. It's deepened my spiritual awareness of things. Now, this gentleman right here, Max Weber, the German sociologist, all-around polymath, wrote a very famous article called Science as a Vocation. And he said that one of the melancholy side effects of modernity, the advancement of technology and science, is that science disenchants the world, drives away the spirits, leaving us bereft and alone in a godless universe. Our subjects don't like that. They don't like, I've probably never heard of this guy, but they certainly don't like his view of modernity. So what our subjects seem to be doing is kind of eventually putting this in a spiritualized context. Because when you tell them about sleep paralysis and things of this, you know, they say things like, nice explanation, Professor, but you got to think outside the box. I've had sleep paralysis, and I've been abducted by aliens, and I know the difference. They're not the same thing. So when you ask him, well, what's the difference? And they go, you have to have had both to know. This explanation, oh, this is not a very good slide here, but my PhD student Susan Clancy has written a book called Abducted, How People Come to Believe They're Kidnapped by Aliens. It's coming out by Harvard University Press this September. It's a marvelous book. I had nothing to do with it. This is something she wrote. It's terrific. Part psychology, part cultural history, and also part autobiography. Adventures Among the Space Alien Abductees. So this will be coming out this September. That sort of really pulls this all together. Now, I should say on one final note, in the interest of scientific objectivity, I have to show you one more piece of data about hybrid breeding. My former colleague Jordan Peterson, now professor at the University of Toronto, sent this slide to me and to all the faculty at the Department of Psychology at Harvard University, saying that, in fact, contrary to our impressions, that there is, in fact, evidence for alien abduction and hybrid breeding. And the evidence being right here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. Okay.